If it's Tuesday, former President Trump going on offense on the trail while on defense in the courtroom, holding a campaign rally this afternoon and once again railing at the Department of Justice and the charges against him. And voters are voting right now in Ohio in a special election that could have a major impact on the fight over abortion rights and will tell us a lot about what's motivating voters ahead of November. Plus, monumental task. President Biden heads out west to sell his legislative successes to a still skeptical public and aims to make a grand statement at the Grand Canyon this hour. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Garrett Hake, and for Kristen Welker on a day in which Donald Trump's political aspirations and legal perils are both front and center. Today, the former president and current GOP frontrunner was back on the campaign trail in New Hampshire at an event for veterans, touting his past record as president, criticizing the Biden administration, and continuing to attack the Department of Justice, calling the legal cases against him politically motivated. Listen to this.
But these incredible numbers are the primary reason that crooked Joe Biden has weaponized law enforcement. He has weaponized. He's done something that nobody thought. They talked about it, but nobody ever did it, and never to this extent. How can my corrupt political opponent, crooked Joe Biden, put me on trial during an election campaign that I'm winning by a lot, but forcing me nevertheless to spend time and money away from the campaign trail in order to fight bogus, made-up accusations and charges? That's what they're doing. I'm sorry, I won't be able to go to Iowa today. I won't be able to go to New Hampshire today because I'm sitting in a courtroom on bull.
Trump also insisted that he will talk about the election interference case, even as his lawyers and federal prosecutors continue to clash over a protective order over exactly what he can share and say publicly about the case. Trump's attorneys are seeking a more narrow limit and arguing that the Justice Department's proposal would violate Trump's First Amendment rights. The changes proposed by Trump's legal team would include allowing the former president to disclose publicly recordings and transcripts of testimony from witnesses in the case. The government had sought to keep that information private, calling it sensitive material. The judge presiding over the case plans to hold a hearing on the proposals by the end of this week. Meanwhile, NBC News has confirmed that the D.C. federal grand jury that returned an indictment against Trump just last week met again today, suggesting that special counsel Jack Smith's investigation is continuing. NBC's Vaughn Hilliard is on the ground for us in New Hampshire today covering the Trump campaign, and in a few minutes we'll be joined by more on the legal front by two NBC legal analysts, former U.S. Attorney Barbara McQuade and criminal defense attorney Danny Savalos. So, Vaughn, I'll start with you. Donald Trump back on the trail today, his first proper rally since the indictment. What did you hear from him today? I understand this was very much the defiant Donald Trump on the trail.
Right, Garrett. I was texting with you just before we went on air here, and I know that you, over the course of the last 10 months, you and I have often traded off events of Donald Trump's that we've gone to, and from my experience, Garrett, I think this is the most defiant that I've ever heard the former president in the last 8 years that I have covered him. Defiance in a way in which he has set down the stakes. There's a lot of talk over the last 18 months that Donald Trump was perhaps softening his 2020 election fraudulent claim talk, right? That he was going to give a more forward-looking message for that Republican electorate. Today, he repeatedly came back to the idea that the 2020 election was rigged and stolen, propagating the election claims that led to the very indictments that he was charged with last week here. For Donald Trump, he made the case, I want to let you listen to him, that around the idea of the protective order, that he would openly defy it because they would not silence him. Take a listen.
They take away your rights on First Amendment. Now they sue because... So now I have one of these lunatic reporters back there saying, "Sir would like to talk to you about your case." Or, "I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to talk about it." Somehow that's not good for votes. Do you agree? When we say, "I can't talk," I'd love to, I will talk about it. I will. They're not taking away my First Amendment right.
It's a defiance not only of the reality of the 2020 election, but for Donald Trump, it's also a defiance of the U.S. justice system, saying that he would talk despite whatever protective order is laid down. But also, Garrett, it was a defiance of the prosecutors who are bringing the charges and seeking the charges against him, saying that when he gets back into office, that he would put forward a special counsel to go after these very individuals. I want to let you hear, though, from a few of the voters who I talked to right before he took the stage, because for Donald Trump, so much of this, the importance of it is winning over the court of public opinion. Take a listen.
You know what that is? That's Nazi Germany Hitler. You can't silence your political opponents because you don't agree with them. You can't lock them up because you don't agree with them. This country is falling quickly. Merrick Garland should be impeached. Mayorkas should be impeached. Joe Biden should be in prison for his bribes. You people don't even cover Joe Biden's media stuff.
He absolutely should be able to talk about it, yeah. And if he wants me to protect him, I'm going to go in there. I'm going to let him know that I'll do it.
He shouldn't be bashing the prosecutor and the judge. He should lay off that part. But if he wants to talk about what is the evidence, he shouldn't be. He shouldn't lose his freedom of speech to do that.
Donald Trump told this crowd during his remarks just a few moments ago that this was the most passionate he has ever seen his base of support. And frankly, I don't think Donald Trump is wrong. As you heard from those folks there, they believe that Donald Trump is a martyr and is being unfairly prosecuted and frankly should be in the White House. And for Donald Trump, it is about mobilizing those very people in the months ahead, not just to win a political race in the Republican nomination, then get back into the White House. But for Donald Trump, it is about controlling at least the reality the great segment of the American population believes in.
Vaughn, I think, the rest of Donald Trump's Republican rivals had this theory that the DOJ, these investigations would somehow hamper him in the primary. That would help them catch up. That clearly hasn't happened. Now I think the Biden campaign, a lot of Democrats think that surely the DOJ and these investigations will hamper him in a general election, and that will help Joe Biden. Does the Trump campaign have a particular view about this? How are they looking at, past the primary, the idea that these things might be fueling the base now, but could become dead weight for them later on?
Trump's campaign has been very clear, Garrett, that Donald Trump, they believe that he in 2020 received more votes than any Republican nominee for president in those key battleground states because he was able to expand the base and turn out more voters who had not previously been engaged in American politics. And that was true. He received more votes by millions in 2020 versus 2016. Of course, the difficulty for them was that Joe Biden also received more votes than Hillary Clinton did. But they believe that if they are able to convince a few percentage points of independents to come back over to their side while holding on to that sturdy base of support and perhaps a less inspired Democratic base of support around Joe Biden, they believe that in those key battleground states, if you just look at Wisconsin, Georgia, Arizona, 42,000 votes separated Biden and Trump in those three states, that is enough. So as long as he is able to hold on to this base of support, which right now primary polling suggests that he is, then they believe that they will be in a good position despite any criminal trials that he is withstanding at that same time. They believe that he at least politically is in a position to be in this fight next year.
We'll see. Vaughn, since you already outed our text chain, I'll ask you another question that we've talked about before because it came up in the sound that you played as well. The idea that Donald Trump is somehow, too bogged down by his legal calendar to get out and campaign. How much does your reporting indicate that that's true? And how much of that is him being the front runner and it being August and him not wanting to be out there doing this kind of thing, on the trail in New Hampshire on a Tuesday afternoon every week?
Right, and Trump actually spoke to it up on stage, and he rallied up the crowd, and he goaded them when he said that he's not going to be able to go to Iowa and New Hampshire because he's going to be in a courtroom on BS. He used the direct expletive when he was up here on stage. But for Donald Trump, it is a reality that he will likely face come the general election. Right now, if he has a successful Iowa caucus, New Hampshire primary, is able to wrap up this Republican primary, it looks like most of these motions he's not going to actually have to appear for in the courtroom, but this would be much more of a general election conversation than it is a Republican primary one.
All right, Vaughn Hilliard for us in Windham, New Hampshire. Vaughn, thank you for your reporting. Let's bring in the lawyers now, because no segment about Donald Trump in 2023 is complete without the political and the legal. Danny, I'll start with you. If you had the hardest legal job in the country right now and we're trying to defend Donald Trump in court, what would you be making of the things he is saying on the campaign trail, and how much harder does that make the job?
Yeah, first, there are two truths about representing Donald Trump. The first is that you do not want him talking on social media or in any context about his case. And point number two is he's going to do it anyway. At this point, if you're going to represent Donald Trump, you know that's part of the deal. You know that that's what representing him is all about. So whereas many attorneys will have a hard line of, I will never represent someone who goes out there and damages their case by talking, you just can't do that if you're going to represent Donald Trump. You know that's part of the deal, and realize that as you represent him, you may have to pivot your defenses as he says things that are damaging to his defense. And with each speech, he potentially closes off different avenues of that defense. So this is something you always have to think about when defending a client that simply won't stay off social media or won't stop talking. And frankly, it's not as uncommon as you might think. Frankly, these kinds of bad decisions that defendants make are why they need criminal defense attorneys in the first place. So Donald Trump is just the most famous, the most well-known of a long line of criminal defendants who make bad decisions. I mean, that's what criminal defense attorneys really do. We're in the business of bad decisions.
So to that end, how much does their proposal around the protective order, trying to narrow the scope of what he can and can't talk about, even matter? Is the odds are he's going to talk about what he wants to talk about. Is the point here to delay rather than try to win that argument in front of a judge?
Yes. I mean, obviously, their overall strategy is to delay, because if this gets to the inauguration, then the case goes away to the extent it's still pre-trial. But look, I may be in the minority here, but I do have some sympathy for Trump's lawyers here. They haven't seen discovery yet. And I know the government is saying, look, we're not talking about stuff that's already public. But at this point, the defense doesn't know exactly what's in discovery. And they know that if nothing else, if they don't know what's in discovery, then they need to be very careful with any protective order and limit it as much as they can. In other words, I guess narrow its scope as much as they can, knowing that their client's going to go out there and say goofy things that could land him back in court. Make no mistake about it, the defense knows that the government is watching Donald Trump like a hawk on social media or at his speeches. And if he steps out of line, they're going to be in court. So if you're defense counsel, you want to make that protective order as narrow as you can to head off as many problems as you can. And the bottom line is you're going to have problems, but that's defense counsel's role. Minimize risk. That's another big part of what we do, is just try to minimize risk.
Barbara, Danny raises 2 points that I think are worthwhile here. Number one, the idea that the Trump team doesn't know what's in discovery, it seems kind of like a little disingenuous to me. We had months of hearings of the January 6th committee. January 6th, the 2020 election, has been litigated in public for the 2.5 years since it happened. If you're the government lawyers here, if you're the prosecution team, how important are these protective order requests really, given the fact that Donald Trump already knows, at least to some degree, who are the witnesses against him, and broadly speaking, what they're probably going to say?
I think a protective order in this situation is critically important for the government. Discovery is not a license to give a defendant information to share with the public. It is shared with us of preparing his defense. There is likely grand jury testimony in here, which the law protects from disclosure. There may be recorded conversations, interviews, and if Donald Trump is able to disseminate that into the public domain, you can bet that those witnesses are going to be the target of threats and harassment. And it could even have a chilling effect on their testimony at trial. The government has an obligation to protect those witnesses. The protective order does not prevent Donald Trump from defending himself publicly. It only prevents from
Uh-oh. All right. Barbara, hold on a second. Barbara, I'm going to give our folks in the control room a chance to try to diagnose what's going on with your microphone here, and I'm going to try to ask another question to Danny here to give them an opportunity to do that. So, Danny, we reported yesterday that Bernie Kerik was in his talking to prosecutors here in the Jack Smith investigation, not in front of the grand jury, but just to prosecutors, about Rudy Giuliani's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. I'm curious how you think this is the kind of thing that might be pursued or not by the special counsel. If they pursue charges there, does it bog them down in the Trump case? I'm thinking about the superseding indictment that came out in the documents case and the idea that every time you add a defendant or every time you expand the scope of this, you slow down kind of the big case that you're really trying to push.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if you never see a superseding indictment in this case, because think about it. They've already concluded that there are other co-conspirators. They're just not named in this indictment. The documents case, by example, there were 2 defendants, and then they added a new 3rd defendant. The documents case, the investigation is more recent. There you have more developing information. The D.C. case has been investigated for several years now, and I would think that if the government wanted to indict folks like Rudy Giuliani and they do supersede the indictment, then they won't be doing that in a couple weeks after the original indictment. Maybe I'm way off here, but I think that was a very deliberate strategy to streamline this case, as I think you were implying. I think you're right. Yeah. They're keeping other named defendants out of the case. If you add 5 additional named defendants, that's 5 additional motions to sever, motions for discovery, motions to dismiss. And Jack Smith, by naming exactly 1 defendant and other unnamed, unindicted co-conspirators, clearly is making this case as simple as he can to move it along to a speedy trial. Now, keep in mind, Jack Smith is a man of few words. And of those few words at his conference that you're seeing right there, he mentioned the words speedy trial. So in a speech that probably contained a couple hundred words, a speedy trial found its way in there. That's Jack Smith's mission. This indictment shows that. As for Bernie Kerik, very interesting character because on the one hand, he seems to be very supportive of the Trump team. But on the other hand, if you read the January 6th committee's report, this is someone who has apparently evidence that there was no there. There was no problem with the voting machines. As presumably or reportedly Giuliani's chief investigator, he apparently concluded that there wasn't anything really wrong with these machines that eventually the companies became accused of putting their thumb on the scale of the election.
Pardoned by Trump once, but that loyalty only went so far. Barbara, since I think we have you back there, I would like you to pick up on that. If we were on Jack Smith's text chain here, what's the debate like inside the special counsel team about this sort of speed versus, how wide you cast the net? Or to the point that Danny was raising earlier, are you going to haul the Trump team into court every time he says something that violates the protective order? Or do you look around and say, look, we got to pick our battles because time is of the essence here? How are they weighing those things?
Yeah, I think you have to be very strategic here. Just because you can file a motion to rein him in doesn't mean you should. You have to keep your eye on the ball and not lose sight of the forest for the trees. And so I think they're going to give him a lot of leeway about what he says. They could move to get a gag order. They haven't done that yet. If he is gagged, then what is the remedy? It's usually progressive discipline. First, a warning, then maybe a fine, and then finally revocation of release. Who's going to want to lock up somebody who is on the campaign trail for president? So it's a very difficult situation for the prosecution. So I think they're going to give him a long leash and continue to keep their eye on the ball and move this case forward. And then to Danny's point about the 6 unindicted co-conspirators, I think they wait until this trial is over. There's no reason they can't wait. The statute of limitations is 5 years for these crimes. And so I think they keep their eye on the ball, get Donald Trump convicted is the strategy. And then maybe some of those people decide to cooperate. That's great. And then even if they don't, you can indict them after this case is over and try them either together or separately.
And if I know anything about Donald Trump from my time covering him, is he's going to test that leash and see exactly what he can get away with from this DOJ team. Barbara, Danny, thank you both for your expertise on this. And coming up next, if it's Tuesday, voters are voting in Ohio in a special election that's become a proxy battle for the fight over abortion rights. We are on the ground in the Buckeye State. Plus, with just 2 weeks to go until the first Republican primary debate, Mike Pence is the latest candidate to make the stage. We'll tell you about what we know about who else is in and who still's got some work to do. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. And as we like to say around here, if it's Tuesday, somebody is voting somewhere. And today, one of those somewheres is in Ohio, where abortion is indirectly on the ballot. Ohioans are voting on a ballot initiative about ballot initiatives. It's a measure that would, among other things, increase the threshold to amend the state constitution there to 60% rather than with a simple majority. That raised threshold would apply to an initiative on the upcoming November ballot that would enshrine the right to an abortion in the state constitution. You may remember a similar amendment passed last year in Kansas, but with just 59% of the vote, making that 60 a pretty important target. Some top Ohio Republicans say today's initiative isn't solely about making it harder for abortion referendum to pass. Here's Ohio Republican Lieutenant Governor John Husted with my colleague, Ali Vitale.
I think that it's a combination of events that many Ohioans, particularly people who have to fund the opposition campaigns, are tired of out-of-state interests trying to come in and amend our Constitution. And that convergence of events of both the Dobbs decision and a growing frustration over this on a variety of issues, on livestock standards, on drug legalization, on all of those kinds of things. We just don't think those should be placed into the Constitution.
But at the same time, Ohio's Secretary of State and a Republican Senate candidate, Frank LaRose, said today's vote is, quote, 100% about keeping a radical pro-abortion amendment out of our Constitution. Well, Ohio hasn't held a statewide August special election in 100 years. Early vote data for today appears to be double the early vote turnout from last May's primary election that featured hotly contested races for governor and for Senate. Abortion was a key driver in last November's midterm election, and today could perhaps give us a small clue of just how much electoral juice this issue still has. The aforementioned Ali Vitale is on the ground for us in Columbus, Ohio. And so, Ali, we can set aside all the spin, right? Today's vote is about abortion. The vote's not on abortion, it's about abortion. So what are you hearing from folks on the ground there? And are Republicans in the state sweating the results already?
Well, I haven't heard from anyone who is outright optimistic. In fact, the Secretary of State, Frank LaRose, who you were just talking about, who has drawn the direct line between today's constitutional amendment rule vote and the amendment vote that comes up in the fall about abortion, he canceled a press availability here today because there were about a half a dozen protesters who were really loud. You have to assume it's because he didn't want to face the press against the backdrop of nearly 700,000 people already voting as of yesterday. You made the point that that is far and away much more than we've seen even in usually scheduled elections like primary elections last year. It does show that there is a momentum on the ground. What direction that momentum goes, we have yet to see. But I was even just catching up with some voters who were leaving this polling place behind me and said to them, hey, are you guys folks that typically vote in special elections like these? They said, no, the media attention and the issues at stake are what are putting them here today on a random Tuesday in the dog days of summer, August. And Republicans here in the state both are concerned about the strategy and also not supportive of the way that their party are doing it. Yes, some are, the majority within the state legislature, but not all of them. Here's one that voted against it and is skeptical that it's going to work the way his party wants it to. Watch.
What's the lesson for your party if come Tuesday night or Wednesday morning, the ballot initiative fails?
Maybe we should spend more time thinking through things before taking the step.
Maybe less red meat for the base, more thoughtfulness?
There is a way to provide the red meat and do things in a thoughtful way. And I'm afraid this was rushed a little bit because we had to make a certain deadline to be able to get it done.
Maybe more thoughtfulness. I mean, that does not sound like a Republican who thinks that this is going to end well. And frankly, those are the conversations, that's the tone of the conversations that I usually have with Republicans who won't say that publicly in Washington, but they're concerned about if their party is out of step with the national mood on this issue, because frankly, the lesson of the post-Dobbs era is they are.
Yeah, big dog that caught the car energy. Look, we obviously we always hate trying to take a special election and project it out further beyond what it is, right? Each of these special elections are special for a reason. But what do you think the results that we'll get at some point today or tomorrow will tell us about the energy level around the abortion issue for November and beyond that?
Look, we're still in this period of testing something that has been previously untested. Kansas was a great example of this. The 2022 midterms are the next example of it. And now here we have yet another plot point in how much motivation and energizing factor is abortion the further out you get from the Supreme Court overturning the Roe versus Wade precedent. I think that that's something, this idea of being post-Roe, that in my 10 years covering reproductive access, we were always working towards what post-Roe would look like. We're now squarely here. Republicans and Democrats are keenly aware of that, and Democrats are the only ones who are finding upside to it at the ballot so far. And we've seen Republicans, you and I spend time in Congress on the campaign trail. Republicans are not itching to talk about this issue, but Democrats certainly are, and this might be another proof point as to why.
All right, Ali Vitale, thank you for being all over this. I suspect we'll be talking about it more tomorrow. And for more on the political ramifications of all this, I'm joined now by Eugene Robinson, Washington Post columnist and NBC News political analyst, and Noah Rothman, senior writer for the National Review. Noah is in the room with me, so you get the first dibs on this. So unlike what we saw in Kansas, this is an anti-abortion referendum here. But as Ali and I were discussing, some of the proponents of it don't really want to say what it's about. I mean, first of all, do you agree with the stipulation that this is about abortion? And what is the way in which this issue is even being discussed tell you about where the energy is on it?
I'm frankly rather confused by the reading of the subtext. As a proxy for a subsequent vote on abortion, it's about abortion. Mm-hmm. The question itself is about amending the Constitution, which has a low threshold, a simple majority threshold. Is a elementary civic education would suggest that maybe we should make that a little bit higher. Mm-hmm. If I were inclined not to test the waters on abortion, I would emphasize the civic nature of this referendum. Republicans seem desperate to take the temperature of the electorate at the state level and the national level on abortion. They've done so several opportunities, and they've gotten the same consistent answer. It seems as though there's something of a contest, especially on the presidential level, to test whether or not there should be a national federal standard or to leave it to the states, whereas you say, OK, let's just leave it to the states. I have my personal preferences. I have my moral convictions, but this should be a state level issue. The states are not participating in that conversation very much. They're sending, even in dark red states, Kansas, Ohio, they're sending a very clear message to Republicans that that answer is not going to be the one they want, which leads you to conclude that maybe the presidential level is going to decide, based on a sort of a back and forth of the course of this campaign, that a federal standard is necessary. And is that going to be a winning issue? It doesn't suggest that there will be, but at least there will be a uniform line that Republicans can get behind. Right now, they're at odds with each other.
Putting my Congress hat on for a second here, I mean, a federal standard seems just almost impossible to ever get through both chambers, but that's a story for another time. Eugene, the idea of a 60% referendum question, setting aside Noah's points about, you know, the Constitution should potentially have a higher bar. It seems kind of anti-small d democratic to say, look, the majority, a significant majority of voters might agree on this issue, but we're going to tell them, no, that's not how this is going to go. What do you make of the idea of a referendum on this issue and the fact that Republicans are calling for it? What does that say about the potency of the effort to protect reproductive rights in this way?
Look, in a vacuum, you could argue that, you know, you should need 60% to change the Constitution. In a vacuum. This is not in a vacuum. This is a referendum that was rushed. It was rushed through in order to make it harder for the referendum that's on the ballot in November to pass, because it looks like it's going to pass. I mean, the polls show that 57% or so of Ohioans, the last poll I saw, said that they would vote in favor of enshrining abortion rights in the Ohio state constitution. So it's so transparent what Republicans are doing here that I think it offends sensibilities even of people who might, you know, might be otherwise willing to accept some sort of restrictions on abortion or whatever. I think it's just gotten under people's skin and bothers people that this is being done in such a transparent way.
No, I feel like the abortion issue always tends to politically cut against the party that seems to be overreaching on it, right? The party who seems sort of the most extreme on this. How do Republicans who have won the most recent political fight on this, in the sense that the Dobbs decision kind of gave them what they've said they wanted, get to a place where their language can match what the country seems to say they want?
That's a very good question, because it's hard to tell what the country does seem to want. I think the issue does cut against the party that appears to be going against what was the status quo, or at least the status quo ante, the reforming party, which is actually usually the case when it comes to healthcare and healthcare-related issues. When it comes to the actual issue, up or down referendum on abortion, 6 weeks, 15 weeks, what have you, the issue cuts against Republicans. It is complicated in the 2022 elections because so much of this issue was clouded by individual candidates who also backed the 2020 election conspiracies. That was also the case in a Wisconsin, I believe, Supreme Court election late last year that many commentators said turned on the issue of abortion, but the candidate himself was tainted by his association with the 2020 method.
So we can't get a clean read on it.
It's very difficult to cut these two issues apart and analyze them separately. I do think, however, the referendum issues tend to suggest that Republicans should be leaning into a status quo that is, polls suggest Americans prefer, which is no restrictions on, or no legal up to the first trimester, 15 weeks, 14 weeks afterwards, restrictions. That's safer ground for them. There's an internal conversation going on within the GOP over whether that's a moral position, much less a political winner.
Eugene, if we had the 2024 election today, I'm of the view that we'd basically be talking about a referendum on Donald Trump again, just given the way that he has dominated the coverage so much across the last 6 months of our political life. But abortion has to be the #1 issue, right? Remember issues that is animating voters in this race right now. Do you think that's the case, or is the economic issue faded in such a way that abortion still remains that issue, or am I misreading that?
Well, I think it depends on what voters you're talking about. I think certainly for a lot of the Democratic coalition, especially young voters, I think abortion is a really important issue. And I think it drives people out to the polls. It drives people to vote. And that's why Democratic officials and candidates keep talking about it, because it is a motivating factor. I think there are other voters for whom, the economy, inflation might be overriding issues. That a lot of people are going to think about different things. But I think it's a very important issue for some important Democratic voters who need to show up for the party to do well.
Ron DeSantis, I think, agrees with my theory here a little bit about the way this election is shaping up right now. I want to play some of what he told my colleague Dasha Burns about the state of the Republican primary field right now. Listen to this.
If the election is a referendum on Joe Biden's policies and the failures that we've seen, and we are presenting a positive vision for the future, we will win the presidency and we will have a chance to turn the country around. If, on the other hand, the election is not about January 20th, 2025, but January 6th, 2021, or what document was left by the toilet at Mar-a-Lago, if it's a referendum on that, we are going to lose.
Donald Trump looks at this politically in the short term, right? He wants to win the primary right now. That's what he's focused on. But should the Republican Party be thinking more about what Ron DeSantis is saying here, and the idea that sort of the Trump grievance machine might work in a primary but struggles in a general election?
I mean, certainly, yes. That would be an instinct towards self-preservation that we have not seen so far from the Republican electorate. There does seem to be an element of schadenfreude or even catharsis that Republican voters get from elevating Donald Trump and sticking it to the people who say that they shouldn't. If Republican candidates believe that they cannot win this nomination without ratifying his 2020 grievances, without fundamentally arguing that he's the incumbent, they're going to lose anyway.
Right.
There was no pathway for them. So the Republican candidates like Ron DeSantis and others who are testing out this message, maybe it's too early in the primary, maybe you wanted to hit it later so that it hits harder. I actually don't think that's true. But at root, there's a distinction here between trying to ingratiate yourself with the Republican electorate and trying to convince them that you are the candidate who can actually deliver for them. And that has to begin with saying Donald Trump lost. He lost fair and square. All his efforts in the courts to try to prove his assertions here were flawed and failed. It's a deprogramming effort that has to begin now, because it's not going to take hold over the course of a week or even a month.
Right. The longer you wait, the harder it is to put that permission structure in place. Eugene, it seems like a good place to do that would be at the debate. We now have 8 Republicans who we believe have qualified for this debate, a few others on the outside looking in. Mike Pence is the most recent to make the stage. Our graphic has Donald Trump on it, but we don't think he's coming. the debates matter in some cycles more than they do in others. As this kind of moves to center stage in the next 2 weeks, how much do you see this debate, whether Trump goes or not, mattering in this cycle?
Well, I think it's a big moment for Ron DeSantis, a big moment for Mike Pence. For those candidates, each of them, aside from Trump, is going to want to appear and sound like the alternative to Donald Trump, like the person that Republicans want to rally around and to try to win the next election. And so it's a very important moment for them. We don't know if Trump is going to be there. I kind of doubt that he will. For DeSantis in particular, DeSantis has had a rough period. He's just today, I guess, fired his campaign manager and got a new one. So I guess it's yet another reset. His poll numbers have just gone in the wrong direction. And so, of course, there is time left, but you need to start going in the right direction at some point if you hope to win the nomination. So I think it's a particularly big moment for him.
Some high-level politics here. A summer of process stories is not going to make you the president. Noah and Eugene, thank you both for your analysis. We got to leave it there. Coming up, President Biden is on the road in Arizona pitching a grand plan. How the White House is hoping the president's historic designation in that swing state may help Democrats in November. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. President Biden is in Arizona right now, making an historic move to preserve sacred native land. Biden formally announced today that over 1,500 miles of land adjacent to the Grand Canyon will now have a national monument designation. This move, which Arizona tribes have been pushing for over the course of multiple administrations, will protect the area from development and from uranium mining. Today's announcement is President Biden's 5th monument designation of his presidency, and he described it as a step to prioritize promises made to Native communities and to preserve history. Listen.
I made a commitment as president to prioritize respect for the tribal sovereignty and self-determination, to honor the solemn promises the United States made to tribal nations, to fulfill federal trust and treaty obligations. I pledge to keep using all that available authority to protect sacred tribal lands.
The president is also out west to tout climate achievements in his Inflation Reduction Act to voters as we come up on the one-year anniversary of its passage. NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli has more from Arizona.
Hey there, Garrett. Well, you know as well as anyone from your perch on Capitol Hill just how at times painful the process was for Democrats of trying to get the Inflation Reduction Act, what was first called the Build Back Better bill, over the finish line and to the president's desk. Well, next week is the one-year anniversary of that. And so today, with such a beautiful location as here, as well as the Grand Canyon, the president kicking off an effort to try to communicate to the skeptical American public what that legislation does. Is the most significant, as the White House puts it, investment in tackling the climate crisis when you combine it with the bipartisan infrastructure law in this country's history. It puts us on a track to meet some of those targets that were set at the Paris Climate Summit. And so this is going to be a weeks-long effort on the part of the president, and it's really notable that it's starting here in Arizona, because one of the things the president also did today was sign a new designation for a national monument that was really pushed for years by tribal communities here. And in Arizona, that tribal community maybe represents 5-6% of the electorate. Well, when we're talking about a swing state like Arizona, where the margin of victory for President Biden here 3 years ago was just 11,000 votes, that means all the difference. Also worth noting who else was here, Garrett. Not just Kyrsten Sinema, the Democrat turned independent who has to make a decision about whether she's going to seek seek another term next year, but also the president singling out one of the children of John McCain, the former senator here. We know, as President Biden put it, how close they were during their time in the Senate together, even though Joe Biden ran against him in 2008, attack dog as the running mate when he was running on a ticket with Sarah Palin. But the president noting in his remarks that for all their disagreements, for all their differences, they were able to get along well, and he always appreciated McCain's optimism for the future. It's notable coming on a day in which we're hearing from the former president, the president's potential likely opponent next year, and we know, of course, the clashes that John McCain had with Donald Trump as well. So a official event here on the part of the president, but one certainly infused with politics, and one we'll see a lot in the coming weeks here, Garrett.
On Mike Memoli and what I think is the most interesting swing state of 2024. Thank you. And up next, high alert for high temperatures. We've got a look at a first-of-its-kind tool for health providers to help protect vulnerable populations from dangerous heat. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Nearly 60 million Americans are under high heat alerts today as this summer's extreme heat wave continues in the Southwest. The National Weather Service warned that temperatures will remain at dangerous levels from Arizona through Texas and out towards Florida. And as temperatures stay high, so do concerns about health risks from the heat. NBC News senior medical correspondent Dr. John Torres has a look at a new heat alert system meant to help doctors deal with the dangerous health impacts of heat on the most vulnerable of communities. Watch.
So this is essentially showing us how climate change is affecting the heat in the country.
Exactly.
Based in Princeton, New Jersey, Climate Central is a climate science and communications nonprofit. Seeking to save lives this summer, they just rolled out a first-of-its-kind heat alert system. Andrew Pershing is one of the lead developers.
We're able to use our system to generate alerts, to tell clinics around the country when they're encountering heat that's likely to be dangerous and allow them to put in place the plans that they have to help keep their patients safe.
According to the National Weather Service, extreme heat is the deadliest natural hazard in the U.S. Children, adults over 65, and those without health insurance are the most vulnerable.
Who are you focusing on?
It's really the clinics that are working with the underserved communities, because those are the people who are much more vulnerable, who aren't necessarily going to have air conditioning, who aren't necessarily going to have somebody looking out for them.
I got a firsthand look at the new system.
This is our heat messages, but then if I zoom in here on heat messages for clinics, these are all of the places that we could be sending the messages right now. And
that's most of the country.
It's most of the country. So what this is saying is that these places are above their 90th percentile, which is that locally specific temperature where conditions start to be dangerous.
A typical heat alert message will look something like this: a personalized email to a health provider warning them of extreme temperatures relative to the clinic's geography. The message also includes links to a new toolkit developed in partnership with Harvard and AmeriCares, providing free information on how to keep their patients safe.
So not just that it's going to be warm, but here's what you can do, and here's the things you need to look out for.
Exactly.
There are currently 17 clinics in 7 states enrolled in the pilot program, and Climate Central plans to expand its reach to benefit hundreds of clinics across the country.
I think our clinicians are very much kind of under the gun in a lot of places, especially in places like Houston that have just been so perpetually hot for so long this summer.
Texas leads the U.S. in uninsured residents, with almost 1 in 5 people without health insurance. The San Jose Clinic in Midtown Houston caters to a large uninsured population, with most patients at or below 250% of the federal poverty level. It is also one of the first clinics to try the new alert system. Dr. Adlea Ibid is the chief clinical officer.
So here at San Jose Clinic, we really strive for health equity, and I think we can't have that conversation without really talking about climate equity. And there's a huge burden, especially in our patient population, with regards to occupational hazards and being put out in the elements day in and day out just to be able to earn a living.
Oscar Ramirez is a construction worker and spends most of his days under the scorching Texas sun. Suffering from hypertension, he says he finds himself fainting during extremely hot days.
Yo pienso realmente, si no es este año, el que sigue cambiar de trabajo. El calor me está afectando mucho.
But thanks to heat alerts, Oscar's physician knows when to reach out and is able to advise him on how to manage extreme temperatures using the free online toolkit, also available in Spanish.
To have someone who's actually sitting there behind the scenes, forecasting and giving us the alerts and giving us the advice alleviates such a huge burden so we can focus on patient care. They'll be, at the very least, saving people from ending up in the emergency room, hopefully, and ultimately saving lives.
NBC News senior medical correspondent Dr. John Torres joins me now with more of this reporting. So, John, what's the main output here, right? What is the advice once you get the data here about how dangerous conditions are?
There's 2 important parts. One is the data to tell you that heat is coming. There's something you need to do about it. But the second part, which is the important part of the toolkit, working with Harvard Sea Change with AmeriCares, they actually give health information. Here's what you need to do. And the reason that's important is because the vast majority of clinic health staff saying, yeah, we know heat's coming, but we're not exactly sure what to do here. especially with our vulnerable. And this helps them, gives them not just the information that it's happening, but what you can do to help protect those most vulnerable people.
Does it build in a structure, too, for employers and that kind of thing? You know, look, it's hot. If you live in Texas, it's hot all the time. But if you have a system like this and a structure to say, like, all right, this is triggered, my company needs to do X, Y, and Z, we need to do it today, and it's systematized.
Yeah, so it's giving them a lot of information. They can take that information and run with it and hopefully do something like that. And this is just a pilot project. They're hoping to expand it much more beyond this. And they're also hoping to move it into other areas, looking at hurricanes, wildfires, floods, those types of things. Basically make it kind of a central, here's how climate's affecting you, here's what you need to do immediately to make sure people stay safe, and then let's work on the bigger problems as time goes on.
As time goes on, we're going to need it. Dr. John Torres, thank you for your reporting on this. And still ahead, why the U.S. is now leaning towards calling the unrest in Niger a formal coup. We'll talk to Courtney Kube, who just returned from witnessing the chaos firsthand. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Turning now to the crisis in Niger, where despite U.S. efforts, any attempt to restore democratic order in the West African country is looking bleak. The U.S. State Department dispatched Victoria Nuland, the department's acting number 2 to Niger, to convey Washington's grave concerns about the attempted takeover. Nuland described her 2-hour meeting with Niger's new self-declared Minister of Defense as, quote, extremely frank and at times difficult. She also conveyed to the junta what's at stake, including hundreds of millions of dollars in U.S. assistance. While in Niger, Nuland had hoped to meet with the democratically elected president, Mohamed Bazoum, who she described as under virtual house arrest. But that request wasn't granted. The Biden administration now faces the difficult choice of whether or not it will formally declare the situation in Niger a coup, as the window for diplomacy seemingly grows smaller and smaller. Joining me now is Pentagon correspondent Courtney Kube, who was recently in Niger. And Courtney, we're glad you're back. Your reporting was incredible. Given these recent events, obviously, and in light of the Deputy Secretary's trip, just how close is the administration to declaring this situation a coup? And why does that language matter here? It's not just semantics.
Yeah, that's right. So we've been asking that question multiple times a day since July 26, when all of this started in Niamey, when President Bazoum was taken into custody under house arrest by his own presidential security guards. But the U.S. officials we've been speaking with still say they are no closer to actually declaring this a coup. But it's important to point out that U.S. officials and U.S. military officials who we've been speaking with in the region, back here in D.C., do acknowledge that everything that they are seeing on the ground in Niger really does meet the definition, the legal definition of a coup. But the U.S. is reticent to actually declare it that because of what it means. It immediately triggers some U.S. laws. And why that's important to the people of Niger is it will halt U.S. military training of the Nigerian military, and it will halt hundreds of millions of dollars in U.S. aid that would go to Niger. Now, the person, General Barmou, who met with acting Deputy Secretary of State Victoria Nuland in Niamey yesterday, is actually the general who has worked very closely with the U.S. military in Niger for years. He heads up the Nigerian Special Operations Forces. We were actually with his troops in Wallam 2 days before this coup broke out, which is a remote part of Niger where the U.S. military trains the Nigerians. I have spoken with a number of U.S. officials who say many people in the Nigerian military, specifically in the special forces, do not want that training relationship to end. The U.S. military, many of them feel the same way. So that's really the reticence to declare this a coup here in the U.S., Garrett.
It's a very fine line to walk. This bloc of West African nations, basically Niger's neighbors, have threatened military intervention if the president isn't returned to power or wasn't returned to power, I guess by Sunday now. We're a couple days past that deadline. Are we seeing any signs of that kind of intervention coming together, or was that just an empty threat?
It's not an empty threat. There is a very real possibility that something could happen. There's two things that have to happen. First, those neighboring nations are supposed to all meet on Thursday and discuss the way forward, whether that would include any kind of a military intervention. But, you know, these neighboring countries, many of them do not have a really robust military to start with. So the idea that they would be able to sort of coalesce together and amass enough of a military force to actually intervene in a meaningful way in Niger, that wouldn't be be able to happen immediately. That would take a little bit of lead time for them to get together. And we're told, according to U.S. officials, that not all of the members of ECOWAS, those regional nations, they're not all on board with the idea of a military intervention. So it's very possible, it's extremely concerning for what it would mean for the region if there were to be a military intervention in Niger. But at this point, it's not in the immediate future, Garrett.
A military intervention against an army that, oops, was just being trained by the United States. So talk to me a little bit about that part of this, too, right? I mean, State Department has ordered a partial evacuation, but what is the status of U.S. armed forces in Niger right now?
So the majority of them are still on lockdown. They've been that way since this coup started several weeks ago. There is a little bit of military. They're still having phone calls. They're still working in some ways there. There's still a little bit of intelligence gathering that's going on there. But for the most part, they have been locked down on the bases. Now, the training mission has already halted for now. It's not ended, but it is on pause right now while the U.S. sort of determines what's going to be the way forward here. But, you know, I will say early on, in the first maybe 3 or 4 days after President Bazoum was taken hostage in his own residence, U.S. military officials who we spoke with were hopeful that this was a sort of a local issue. So General Chiani, who is right now the self-proclaimed leader of the country, the hope was this was just a beef between him and President Bazoum and that would end soon. And at this point, Garrett, it doesn't look like this is going to end anytime soon.
No, it does not. Courtney Kube, thank you for your excellent reporting on this issue. And like I said, we're very glad to have you back. Courtney and her producer, Moshe Gaines, have been much more on being trapped in Niger as this coup unfolded in a powerful backstory segment coming up on Hallie Jackson Now. That's up next here on NBC News Now. You're not going to want to miss that. And thank you for being with us this hour. NBC News Now coverage continues with Aaron Gilchrist in for Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.